All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm very excited to see everybody's trickling in. So we'll give it about another minute for everybody to join, and then we'll kickstart today's webinar. For those of you who are already here, thank you very much for being on time. We really appreciate it. And yeah, just bear with us. In about a minute, we'll kick things off. All right. I'm very excited to see that we have a pretty global audience dialing in today's webinar. So everyone, thank you very much for taking time, regardless of where you are. My name is Ian Lee, and I'm part of the founding team here at Merkle Science, where I currently serve as the Director of Product. For those of you unfamiliar with Merkle Science, but I hope everyone is, Merkle Science was founded back in 2018 and is one of the leading blockchain analytic providers that works with both public and private sector organizations in order to safeguard the Web3 space. We are headquartered in New York with offices in London, Bangalore, and Singapore. Now, today, I'm very excited to welcome you all to this exclusive training session on the Polkadot ecosystem, where we will be exploring the different ways in which protocols can navigate this evolving regulatory landscape. I'm joined by a number of esteemed speakers, Radha Krishna, the Technical Education Lead from the Web3 Foundation, Pavla, Data Platform Lead from Parity Technologies, and Jonathan, Policy Director at Digital Chamber. All of them have extensive backgrounds in the Web3 space, and I will leave them to share more about their experiences later on. Now, that said, between them, we have a very exciting presentation lined up where we'll be covering everything from what is Polkadot, how blockchain analytics can be used for data integrity, to AML and CFT best practices to safeguard your business. Now, I know 3 hours can seem pretty long, but having looked over the content myself, trust me, by the end, you'll wish we had more time before this is over. Now, in terms of the agenda, we'll be kicking things off with Radhakrishna, who will help us explore how Polkadot is redefining blockchain with scalable multi-chain protocol designed for both security and interoperability. This will be followed by a presentation by Pavla, who will be covering Polkadot's role in advancing blockchain technology with a focus on digital identity, central bank digital currencies or CBDCs, and the emerging landscape of digital finance, including initiatives like UK's digital pound. This should take approximately an hour, after which we will be giving you guys a short 10-minute break before returning for a session with Jonathan, who will be navigating us through the regulatory challenges for protocols and their ecosystem. Now, after each session, we will have a short Q&A, which I strongly encourage everyone to take advantage of, right? It's not every day we have such experts available to answer your questions, so you definitely want to capitalize on this opportunity. Please share any questions that you might have in the Q&A section, and I'll do my best to moderate them as and when they come up. Now, given our tight schedule, we may not be able to cover all of your questions at the Q&A right after each presentation, but rest assured at the end of the session, we will have a longer Q&A, and we'll use that opportunity to pick up on any questions that haven't been answered. And in the worst case scenario, if you guys do have burning questions that you'd like to engage with any of the presenters, we'd be more than happy to put you in touch with them so that you can speak to them afterwards. Now, once we're done with the wonderful presentations, I will then be taking over to show everyone a short demonstration of what exactly does crypto monitoring look like and how you may leverage blockchain data to enhance your compliance and risk management. Now, finally, do remember that after this webinar, there will be a short assessment which you can take in order to obtain a certificate. So you definitely want to be paying attention. And if you're really, really nice, the presenters might drop some helpful tips for the assessment. So definitely, do pay attention. Now, without further ado, may I invite our first speaker, Radhakrishna, to the screen.
Hello, everyone. Wherever you're joining from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So a long session ahead, all of you. But at least, to set the stage right, I'll sort of introduce Polkadot. So I'm the technical education lead at Web3 Foundation. But I got to know the audience is pretty diverse here, so I'll try to keep it high level and not overwhelm you with Polkadot's like technical specifics. So let's get started. Yeah, just to give you a preview of what's coming next with my colleague Pavla, who's going to give more insights into how we do data analytics on Polkadot. So I like to start with data first. Data never lies. So Polkadot, if you ask me what is Polkadot, I would always show you the data first and then get into the technical specifics. So we have 51 parachains running on Polkadot. So you can think of them as rollups. So think of like 51 Ethereum rollups in a way, right? So they are running on Polkadot. Collectively, all of them host over 8 million accounts. They had like 32 million transactions in the month of September, and of which like around 200,000 accounts have actively performed these transactions. So yeah, so this is the only technical slide I have in the presentation deck. So I mentioned to you that we have 51 rollups, 51 parachains. So these, we have this beautiful graphic that sort of explains the architecture of Polkadot. So all these pink blocks that you see here, so these are parallel blockchains, that are running in parallel to the relay chain, which is like the Polkadot's blockchain. So the beauty of this design is that Polkadot makes no assumption on the parachain's logic. So you can write a blockchain, a rollup that is for like data availability, for identities, for gaming, for social networks. So the imagination is yours. So whatever blockchain use case you can think of, you can engineer a blockchain in a customizable way and put it on Polkadot and run it. So that's why we call Polkadot as a heterogeneous multi-chain, because each individual blockchain runs like different logic, and the Polkadot relay chain sort of secures them. From block number one, the parachain will always have the security inherited from Polkadot, and also the communication with other blockchains in the Polkadot ecosystem, that's also fully secured by Polkadot. Yeah, just to give you a glimpse of the network. So we have the blockchain that's producing blocks every 6 seconds. In terms of like tokens, we have a billion and more. So we have like inflationary tokenomics there. But as you can see, we are a decentralized network. So you can monitor like Polkadot nodes live. So you can see right now, like Polkadot has around like 400 active validators for producing blocks, and they are distributed across the world. Now, I mentioned to you about like parachains, right? Like these blockchains are custom built, for a specific use case. We use like a Rust programming language, and we don't use like EVM here, right? So Polkadot uses like WebAssembly, which is another like virtual machine, if you can think of it that way. So slightly different architecture from what you might be like familiar with. So I told you we have 51 parachains. Obviously, this screenshot is a little outdated. You can see names of like different parachains here. So we have Asset Hub, which is part of the Polkadot protocol that actually deals with like assets, like our USDC, USDT natively minted in Polkadot. So they're in this particular parachain. We call that like system chain, and then it also hosts a bunch of like NFT collections in there. So those are system chains, and then we have application specific like blockchains there that you can see. Moonbeam is like a EVM chain. So most of the Ethereum applications can seamlessly run on that. Trust is like a storage solution parachain. So you can get an idea that you have multiple parachains in Polkadot for different like use cases. And each and every parachain here is an individual blockchain. So you can see to the extreme right that Asset Hub has 5 million blocks, Akala has like 5, CapEx has like 3 million blocks. So yeah, so these are not directly tied to Polkadot. They're running independently and individually. They're sending their blocks to Polkadot for security. Okay, so that's the technical part I have. So I'm gonna keep it high level from now on. So let's talk about like where exactly Polkadot fits into, right? So you would have been exposed to different like blockchain networks, Bitcoin for sure, so Bitcoin sort of, it created like a calculator in a way. So you have a bunch of accounts which can keep track of like balances. And then Ethereum, you were able to deploy programs and then you were able to execute them. So Ethereum was sort of this world computer. And then what Polkadot did was create, an efficient version. So where you have multiple cores. So that's what we call like multi-core server. And I have to like mention about the origins of Polkadot. So of course, Gavin Wood is a co-founder of Ethereum, writer of like Solidity language, and he has technically architected many parts of like Ethereum. And then the next project that he actively worked on was like Polkadot, right? So, and he sort of thought of all the challenges that Ethereum architecture might encounter and sort of worked on Polkadot to address them ground up. So, and even today and yesterday, I've seen like a lot of posts on crypto Twitter that Ethereum's improvement plans are actually converging to the Polkadot's design that I've shown you earlier, bringing rollups under a common security like Umbrella, etc. So I can talk about like the features that we have currently that distinguish us from other blockchains. So one key update that rolled out last month was Agile Core Time. So you can think of this as so think of blockchains, right? So if nobody is using them, they're literally like ghost towns. So there's no activity, but still the blockchain keeps producing blocks, and it's all information that's just consuming resources. So Agile Core Time is a solution to make this blockchain, block space efficient. So let's say you have like a chain with very high activity, you can get 24/7 access to have your blocks produced. And let's say you're a chain that wants to produce a block like every day. Probably you're doing some real estate use case in a country. You don't have like land sales happening like every 6 seconds. So it makes sense for you to consolidate stuff at the end of the day, but you still would like to maintain your own decentralized ledger. So that's how Polkadot is offering through this Agile Core Time mechanism a flexible way to improve efficiency in Web3 in general. You're only producing blocks, you're only finalizing transactions when you want them to be finalized. So that's the idea, right? So we want to make something like an Ethereum blockchain to work like a multi-core computer. So each core can run the same task, or it can also run different tasks. And that's where, if we want to onboard like, billions of users to Web3, this is like a catchy line everybody has in their presentations. You really have to think of this ways of like scaling. So Polkadot's choice of like having these multiple cores assigned to these multiple parachains, which could actually do the same work or like different work, and offering this flexibility is the way to go in that direction. Like I mentioned, again, like parallelization is one of the key themes of like Polkadot's architecture. So here we are actually doing both data as well as execution sharding. So sharding is a way like, you spawn like these different threads that are sort of doing tasks in parallel. So with this architecture, we are able to, achieve things that are yet to be discovered by the broader Web3 community. So Polkadot offers like the lowest fees for, stablecoin transfers. So this is on like Polkadot Asset Hub that I mentioned. So right now we have, I think Pavla can show you how to get the data about like, the stable coins like later on. There's a lot of liquidity coming into Polkadot for this particular reason. So you could bring in liquidity and then transact with it on Polkadot architecture and make use of the efficient design that Polkadot has created, right? So you don't see fee spikes a lot. So even the fee model in Polkadot, it's based on it's always like predictable. You can make a business model for next 1 year without thinking, hey, when the fee is going to be spiking on my chain. So some of the really high volume use cases that have benefited from Polkadot's flexible architecture. One is like mythical games, so they have a mythical chain with a lot of activity. So they are like one of the top like parachains that's using Polkadot's full capacity in a way. So they also are a home for like popular applications. So if you're joining from the US, so you can check out like NFL Rivals app. So behind the app, you have like the Polkadot technology that's actually taking care of all of your minting of NFTs or transfer of NFTs and so on and so forth. So we also have another popular use case like social media, right? So creating social graphs and being able to keep track of like the interactions of these social actors on blockchain is a challenge. Personally, I can't see this being implemented on Ethereum or like even like an EVM chain. So the scale is huge, and frequency is one of the blockchains, parachains on Polkadot. If you look at the news, they're also thinking of acquiring TikTok. So the idea is that technically they're confident that even if a large app like TikTok is going to make it to like blockchain, then like Polkadot's technology stack is able to like support such sort of bold move, right? So this is something that you can check and yeah. And we're taking things a little bit further. So we're also taking the good things from Web 2 into like Web 3. So blockchains, when they are resource constrained, they should be able to get more resources if they want. We want on-demand elastic scaling like architecture in Web 3. And Polkadot is going to deliver that. It's the next feature that we are actively working on. So this is something that we'll push end of the year or early next year. So this is how think of things that have broken networks previously, like CryptoKitties on Ethereum. Recently there was this thing about like on-chain what do you call them, ordinals. Yeah, so stuff like this, which is like high volume, high activity on blockchains, will push it to its limits. So that's when any parachain on Polkadot should be able to gather additional cores to sort of support that surge in that volume, right? So we are providing an infrastructure for that to happen. And yeah, so most of these surges are like one-time events in a year. Your blockchain use case is ready for that as well with Polkadot. So in terms of like resilience, I've shown to you like a map with a bunch of nodes, but even in terms of how the nodes and like the sophisticated nominated proof of staking that we use leans towards like decentralization. So you can see whenever you see the Nakamoto coefficient mentioned, you can see Polkadot always like standing tall in that graph. So the other thing is also energy efficiency. So at the end of the day, the 400 validators that produce blocks for like Polkadot, the resource requirements for running a Polkadot node is manageable. It's not like you don't need like a high end or like supercomputer sort of to run those things. So you can run that with like a consumer grade like hardware. So in terms of even like energy efficiency, the network flourishes. Even in terms of like the light client design and architecture, like Polkadot has small dot, which sort of lets you directly connect to the blockchain network instead of connecting with like intermediaries. So the emphasis on light clients and energy efficiency is still there. So So I thought like for an audience like you who are like very regulatory and compliance oriented, I want to show like all the things Polkadot has to like offer. Yeah. So finally, the selling points for like Polkadot technology is like shared security with interoperability, right? So all the blockchains that choose to become parachains on Polkadot enjoy the full security of Polkadot. It's not like the security of Polkadot is divided between these 50 chains. So each chain inherits the full economic security of like Polkadot, which is right now around like $6 billion. So if you want to make an attack on an individual parachain, your costs are astronomical. So they're never zero. I mean, the probability is never zero. There is always a probability. So the cost of that attack is astronomical. So even the communication between these parachains is secured by that $6 billion, right? So if you're sending like $10 from one parachain to the other one through like a cross-chain transaction, the cost of like attacking that is so much. So, and this is the resilience that I'm talking about. You would have heard about these multi-sig bridges, which are prone to like hacks, bad bridge designs. So that is not an issue with communication of blockchains within like Polkadot. And we do have a lot of cross-chain activity happening, plenty of like volume in terms of like asset transfers happening between the parachains of Polkadot. We also recently started this trustless bridge to Ethereum. So trustless bridge meaning like Polkadot knows what's happening on Ethereum. So Polkadot actually runs a light client of Ethereum. And on the Ethereum side, there's a smart contract that runs a light client of Polkadot. Both these blockchains are sort of, knowing about what transactions are final on the other one. So this way we eliminated the need for multi-sigs. So this is a beautiful design, but it comes at a little cost. So more innovation need to happen in that area to bring it to like regular users. But that bridge is sort of live, and you can use XCM to send assets to Ethereum and vice versa. And that's what I captured in this thing. So we have a trustless bridge to Ethereum through Snowfork. We have a trustless bridge to Kusama, like other relay chain. We have a bridge to Bitcoin. This is close to being like the trustless bridge for Bitcoins out there. I know Cardano is venturing into this space as well, but Polkadot already had the solution much before. So we also have other like parachains that are looking at bridging to broader like Web3 ecosystems. Yeah. So, but Polkadot technology sort of was always leaning towards creating these trustless solutions. Okay, so I gave you enough pointers about like Polkadot and then its technology and what it can achieve. But again, I'd like to again ask this question, what is Polkadot? So we're much more than being a blockchain of blockchains. So as a team, we always were, I work at Web3 Foundation. So this is the motto of like Web3 Foundation, it's less trust and more truth. Like what kind of technology and systems can we create to ensure we can operate in a trustless manner. So the main goal of like Polkadot and the teams that are working for it is to provide a scalable, secure, and resilient platform for Web3 applications and services. So you can think of this as a cloud service for like Web3 applications that is truly scalable, secure, and resilient. And a key part of like Polkadot is the Polkadot DAO. So we are I can claim this, that we are like the largest DAO out there, because you can look at the activity. So we have 11 million DOT in treasury. So that corresponds to, we used to have a lot. So I'll tell you shortly what happened to that DOT. But yeah, so we have 11 million DOT in the treasury. The treasury can also support other assets. So right now, the treasury is also holding a bunch of USDT and USDC, which is doing like trustless like swaps on like one of its parachains. So the treasury is directly interacting with like different parachains to make it like a multi-asset one. So we had over 1,200 like referenda that we voted on. And if you want to get the scale of activity that's happening in the DAO, so right now there are about like 40 active referenda that the Polkadot community is voting on. And about like 10% of the total dot supply has participated in governance so far. And what did Polkadot DAO achieve? So one of the things is like putting the Polkadot logo on Messi's t-shirt. So this is one of the so this is one of the referenda that wanted like Polkadot to be like a official sponsor of Inter Miami CF. Yes, so the DAO has made like multiple decisions, and I'd like to say it's not the only one that we're sort of working on. The Polkadot DAO also diverts its funds, its treasury to technology, business development, marketing, talent, operations, and research. So think of like this decentralized body, the Polkadot community coming together. They have access to, everybody with DOT are able to vote on these referenda. They can also add like some conviction and then increase their vote weight. A lot of interesting thing happening in governance in general, if you'd like to check it out. And regarding the treasury spending, so like I mentioned, we are learning from our, the previous successes or failures. So you can see the treasury spending has significantly reduced in the recent months. So the DAO itself is becoming very conservative in sort of like picking the proposals that it wishes to give funding for. Yeah, so looking at the theme of this webinar, so we are talking about regulation and compliance in general, right? So you can think of Polkadot as being defiantly compliant in a way. We've always complied with the regulatory bodies, but we have also did a very active outreach. We didn't ignore them or treat them like adversaries. So Polkadot and Web3 Foundation always went a step ahead, saying, hey, so this is new way of organizing yourself. There's this concept of DAOs. There is this concept of like blockchain technology. You'll have to understand like how it works so that you don't do some kind of overreach and sort of harm the innovation that's coming out of like Web3. So Polkadot always played like this active role of being resilient against like regulatory overreach in a way. So what did Polkadot do and Web3 Foundation? So we have a legal team at Web3 Foundation here in Zug, Switzerland. We kept an active dialogue with SEC for a really long time, and sort of tried to follow whatever regulations and rules that they have, and also propose like what changes they need to make to their regulatory framework. For instance, for the recent FIT 21 Act, which sort of tells the US government, how to classify digital assets, whether they're decentralized or whether should they be governed by SEC or should they be under CFTC. So that sort of guidelines and framework in drafting that proposal, Web3 Foundation had played like a very active role. So almost around like 90% of the text that we sort of submitted to them was adapted into the actual bill. And we had like the chief legal officer from Web3 Foundation even testify at the US Congress. And also in Europe, like we're doing a lot of outreach. So here are a few things that we did in the last 6 months. There's more coming out. So personally, like I'm a technical educator, so I'm connected with like the legal team a little bit. So if you want later on, I have my contact details. So if you're interested in collaborating with Web3 Foundation in some form of compliance or regulation related work, you can definitely reach out to me. I'll take your word to the appropriate person at the foundation. And yeah, so being a technical educator, I also have to show this. Like if you're interested in learning about like Polkadot, we have multiple education efforts out there. One of the premium educational offerings is the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. So soon we'll come with like an online version of it. So keep track on of the announcements on the Polkadot socials. We'll have one in January. And also keep track of like the announcements regarding in-person Polkadot Blockchain Academy offers. So to learn more about like how Polkadot works. And yeah, so if you're planning for like resilience, I highly encourage you to look at like Polkadot's technology stack and sort of make your decision. And here are my contact details, like my email. So you can take a picture and then yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions or requests for like collaborations. Thank you. So do I hand it over to Pavla or do you want to say something in the middle?
I'll jump in for a second, but
Okay.
thank you very much, Dr. Radhakrishna, for the wonderful presentation. You know, as a lawyer myself, when I first entered into the space, a lot of the discussion, I think, in the early Web3 space was, you know, what role does regulation play in this Web3 space? And a lot of the, I think, the pushback against regulation was that, hey, you know, regulation is going to come at the expense of innovation, right? And people always say you can't strike a good balance between the two. But I think, you know, Polkadot demonstrates very well that this is not true. You know, you can innovate in a compliant and safe manner. It may take, you know, slightly longer. It may take a little bit more effort, but I think it's definitely worth the trade-off, right? We've seen in the past, you know, what happens when projects just, you know, push ahead in spite of not having proper safeguards, and it really comes at the expense of the ecosystem. So, you know, really hats off to Polkadot, you know, for taking arguably the harder route, but, you know, as it shows today, it really pays off. Now, I will jump quickly into the Q&A, right? And I'm glad to see that we have 1 or 2 questions that has already come in. But, you know, like I mentioned at the start, I do encourage you guys in the audience to post your questions if you do have any, right? Again, it's not always we have an opportunity to engage, you know, with, you know, the developers and tech leads who are behind, you know, these innovative solutions. So with that, you know, I will turn over to the one question that has come in. So this question is for you, Radha. It says, I would like to know what advocacy is being done in the Middle East, particularly in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
I think our focus was mainly the US and Europe. Personally, I haven't seen much of like Polkadot presence in that area, although we'd like to improve our footprint in the Middle East as well as like in India, where I'm from. But yeah, I think for now, like I said, we were broadly focused on creating this scalable like technology, and we're like broadly engaging with organizations like SEC in terms of like compliance.
Thank you. Second question that has come in. Are there any projects or chains in the Polkadot ecosystem that has incorporated regulatory compliance in their protocol? Ooh, tough
Yeah,
one.
definitely check out like Polymech protocol. So Polymech is like a fundraising Web3 platform. So they are decentralized yet like regulatory compliant. So they have implemented this interesting way of doing like KYC. So they've partnered with like Deloitte. So that's one of the enterprise partnership within the Polkadot ecosystem. So what Deloitte does is it takes your passport details or whatever, it attests it on chain and it burns that details. So basically you have an attestation saying you're over 18, you're belonging to this country, you live in this address or whatever, and then you choose to share what you want to share with the fundraiser team. So all of this is being done on a blockchain, parachain on Polkadot. So check like Polymech. And they're like sort of regulatory compliant, but directly, pushing for regulatory compliance, I don't think there's any blockchain that's sort of doing it, right? So we have blockchains that are trying to be regulatory compliant from the beginning, and we have a bunch of examples in the Polkadot ecosystem for that.
Awesome. Now, to be clear, just for the members of the audience, the KYC attestation, all of that is done off-chain. None of that confidential private information is stored on-chain, but instead what is stored on-chain is simply an indicator that, yes, a person is above 18, that there's no actual proof behind it. All of this is done by Deloitte. And so there's no risk at a person's personal information being leaked.
Right.
Awesome. So we have shared the link to Polymech inside the chat. So for those of you who are interested, please do feel free to take a look. And with that, we will resume the presentation. But like I said, if you guys do have questions, just put it inside the Q&A, put it inside the chat. If we don't have time to get to it, right after each presenter, we will circle back at the end. Right. So with that, without further ado, let's invite Pavla next to the stage. We'll be talking about how Polkadot leverages blockchain analytics in order to keep its ecosystem safe.
Thank you, Jan. Sorry, a second here to share my screen and get my mic on. Thank you for the introduction. Very glad to be here. A few words about myself. I'm the data platform lead in Parity Technologies, so building the data platform to share insights and democratize the data around Polkadot, both internally and externally, and maybe a few things about prior experiences that might be interesting to our audience. Before joining Parity and Web3 in general, I was working for a long time in the banking industry, predominantly as head of regulatory reporting. So I was in charge of reporting on credit risk, capital adequacy, liquidity risk, essentially anything that falls under the Basel regulatory framework. So just a piece of information as it nicely, I think, segues into a few introductory slides of my presentation. So what I will be attempting to explain to you is blockchain analytics on Polkadot, and try to just like Rada did, share some insights around how Polkadot operates and how that is relevant from the data perspective. If we start from a basic comparison of Web3 and Web2 data, certain obvious distinctions come to mind. For example, blockchain data has a very critical benefits in a sense of that is immutable and tamper-proof. So once the data is recorded, it cannot be altered or deleted. And this immutability essentially ensures that the data remains consistent and trustworthy over time. As you might have known, each block in a blockchain is connected to the previous one through cryptographic hashes, and this linkage makes it practically impossible, not impossible as Rada said, but practically impossible, as you would need, especially in a less decentralized networks, a very large stake in the network and power in order to change the outcomes of the consensus of the protocol. And because all of the transactions are recorded on a public ledger, blockchain provides complete transparency. So any participant can verify transactions, and this enhances the trust among stakeholders. On the other hand, Web2 legacy data sources or traditional databases, their data can be modified or removed by those that have sufficient access rights. And this flexibility, although sometimes can be pragmatic and allows a certain flexibility, it really opens the door to potential data integrity issues. They are centralized in a sense that a single entity or group holds most power in these Web2 systems, and therefore point of failure is also centralized. This can lead to vulnerabilities in how data is managed and biases in how data is managed. There's also a risk of data manipulation with fewer checks and balances, of course. There's a high risk that data can be tampered with either maliciously or accidentally. So it's really remarkable, I would say, that anyone can analyze in real time all of the economic activity on blockchain with absolute certainty that the data isn't tampered with. If I compare that to, for example, situation in the banking sector, I would say it's quite unprecedented, since when there's always a delay in banking sector when a state change happens, for example, in your user-facing analytical application, like your loan application or your credit card application, to when that actually is reconciled to one centralized general ledger. Because a human error can occur, or a system error can occur, or simply certain regulatory rules may not be programmed into the system, but applied afterwards once the transaction already takes place. So there's a lot of reconciliation that oftentimes needs to takes place in order to reconcile that analytic to general ledger view. While in blockchain, simply the ledger is fully distributed, fully transparent, and you have immediate finalization and reconciliation of all of the records. In terms of managing data from like a data analyst perspective, this like distributed single source of truth seems like a holy grail for anyone who's interested in data quality. But things aren't as peachy as it sounds. There are certain challenges that come with handling blockchain data. First and foremost, blockchain data structures can be very complex. The data is stored in blocks which are linked through cryptographic hashes. So oftentimes when you need to derive a certain metrics that is somewhat complex, like for example TVL, you would need the full history of data and all of the business changes that happen to the protocol in order to be certain that what you derived is correct and representing of that metric in the real world. It's simply complex because the data structures in blockchain are optimized for blockchain operations and not necessarily user-friendly for data analysis. And oftentimes you need to parse large strings of data in order to get valuable information. There's high volume and velocity as blockchain ecosystems grow. They generate massive amounts of data very rapidly. So managing, processing, and storing the data can be really resource intensive. The architecture itself is decentralized. Data is distributed across numerous nodes worldwide. As this allows resilience, like Rada explained, it can be challenging in terms of data aggregation. There is a certain lack of data standardization. This is more applicable to situation where you aim to compare data across multiple ecosystems, because various networks use various protocols and data structures. So integrating and interpreting data from these different sources can be challenging as they have various standards, various types of implementation, and that's complicating the data comparison. You can also, as a data practitioner or someone who's interested in managing data scale in blockchain, come across scalability issues, because as the blockchains grow, so does the data size. Therefore, scaling data infrastructure to accommodate growth can be very sacrificing to performance and very hard to manage the two. And of course, there's decentralized accountability, since there's no single point of single entity controlling the data. Accountability is shared. Therefore, all the users are empowered to verify the integrity of data themselves. So this, I think, puts a bit things into perspective in terms of Web3 and Web2 comparison, and begs the question of how do we approach blockchain data analytics on Polkadot. I think in order to understand that, we should start with some high-level understanding of Polkadot's key capabilities. I will try to skip the numbers and concepts already shared by Rada, but in any case, I will try to explain those that are relevant from the data perspective. So obviously, Polkadot, as explained, is shared around a very sophisticated nominated proof of stake consensus protocol. by which the relay chain provides security for its entire system of connected parachain. This shared security model reduces the risk of individual chain attacks and also allows us a higher reliability into integrity of cross-chain data. By design, Polkadot scales through sharding through its parallelized rollups or parachains, and they can leverage one or multiple execution cores that guarantee high quality block space in Polkadot. Interoperability is also something that was built into protocol by design. So Polkadot enables its rollups to communicate amongst each other, allows different parachains to exchange data and information. And that's a key capability, I would say, for building the decentralized applications on Polkadot, because they oftentimes need to leverage on data and assets from multiple chains. And this out-of-the-box functionality actually allows that a synergy is built amongst those chains. Then on-chain governance, a very advanced feature in OpenGov in its second iteration of evolution with the OpenGov that was launched last year in June. Completely on-chain, completely decentralized. Every dot holder can propose and vote on upgrades, participate in protocol changes, and submit funding proposals. What's relevant to mention here, all of the changes are automatically enacted. So no one can retract the decision once it's reached by the Polkadot community, by the dot holders. It's automatically enacted on chain, and protocol is either automatically upgraded or the funds are automatically disbursed. So this allows really our chains to evolve and adapt continuously and to be in a situation that they are really future-proof. Alongside interchain interoperability within the ecosystem, there is also a growing ecosystem of trustless bridges, which allow the communication across the aisle, so communication with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other L2s. When we try to put some color and numbers around these capabilities, I will just mention a few items that weren't already shared. So 32 million transactions validated by the Polkadot relay chain and 400 million events processed only in September show really a vibrant activity within the Polkadot ecosystem as a whole. Almost 60% of the total DOT in circulation is staked, which amounts to 850 million DOT. So a strong commitment to participating in shared security of the network. In terms of scalability, we have 50 parachains on Polkadot, 50 plus, and around 40 parachains on Kusama. Around 100 execution cores that allow, as I explained, high quality block space. And in terms of interoperability, as of year to date, more than 600,000 cross-chain messages were exchanged between parachains. There are 50 plus pellets, which are, let's say, encapsulated functionalities within Substrate that parachain builders can utilize in building their chain. And in terms of governance, apart from, I would say, 2.5 average new proposals created per day, it's important to mention that Polkadot and its parachains have gone through more than 800 runtime upgrades. So only by that figure alone, Polkadot is the most upgraded ecosystem as to date, because it's supported with this on-chain governance that allows a seamless forkless upgrades and very kind of backward compatible protocol changes. So that's some figures around Polkadot's key capabilities to understand just the vibrancy and the scale of the ecosystem. Second step in understanding Polkadot data would be to understand what are the particular building blocks for anyone who wants to interact with Polkadot. At the base level, of course, are blocks, critical units containing multiple components relevant to the blockchain state. So each block contains a hash to the previous block and holds items like extrinsics, events, etc. Extrinsics are user-initiated or system-initiated transaction, essentially signaling to the system that an event is about to occur. They can either be signed or unsigned, meaning user-initiated or system-initiated. So, for example, transfers or automatic distribution of staking rewards. Events, on the other hand, are records of changes within the chain. So they are emitted after the extrinsics or transactions are executed. They're very useful for tracking specific actions like token transfers or governance changes. Metadata defines the structure of the blockchain. So extrinsics, events, and storage, it's constantly updated as the runtime evolves. And therefore, metadata is relevant for ensuring this mentioned backward compatibility. And then lastly, the on-chain storage, which includes elements like account balances, validator information, and staking status. It's essentially a snapshot of all of the data stored on the blockchain at any given block. So these are the building blocks of lower level elements when interacting with blockchain. So the third question to ask ourselves is, how do we access that Polkadot data? Of course, first and most important component are the substrate nodes. Nodes expose RPC endpoints for direct blockchain interaction. They allow fetching of the data, such as the mentioned blocks, extrinsic events, and storage values. But what's required is a familiarity with RPC methods and parameters to interact with the node. They're often used in backend services or custom applications. There are many, I would say, very beneficial and powerful libraries that are relevant for decoding the block data or accessing blockchain data directly. One of the most famous ones and powerful ones is the JavaScript library Polkadot.js, an API library designed to interface with all of the substrate-based blockchains. So not only those that are within the Polkadot ecosystem, but other blockchains built on substrate that are outside of the scope of Polkadot shared security. So yeah, Polkadot.js allows simplification of complex tasks like querying the chain states, subscribing to real-time updates, and submitting transactions. It's very widely used and for web applications and front-end development. Another one I would mention definitely is a substrate API sidecar. This is a tool that was built by Parity Tech and it's maintained by its engineers. It's a REST API service that provides endpoints for common blockchain data retrieval needs. It really abstracts the complexity of direct RPC calls. It provides real-time data decoded from the Polkadot blockchains, and also it's ideal for integrating blockchain data into applications without dealing with, let's say, lower level specifics of the protocol. Another types of libraries worth mentioning, which I will not go into much detail now, is a SubXT, the Rust library, very popular Pi substrate interface, and a Substrate Connect or Small Dot, very lightweight library that is essential for integrating, for example, Polkadot data directly into web applications. It can run in a browser, it can run in a mobile phone, so it's very powerful. There's a very rich suite also of indexers, subquery for custom queries, subsquid, like a full stack framework for indexing and querying blockchain data, and a very popular Subscan as a multi-chain explorer with API access to detailed blockchain metrics and statistics. Those would be let's say, 3 types of interactions when you want to interact with the data directly, or you need it for a specific use case. But what's also very convenient is Polkadot is increasingly present on different blockchain analytics networks. Some of them listed here are fully integrated or in process of integration, or plan to be integrated, like Token Terminal, Dune, Artemis, or specific ones like DepRadar and DeFi Llama. So that's a very convenient approach for anyone that wants standardized metrics that are comparable across different ecosystems, and is one way of understanding the Polkadot data. So having taken that into consideration, what Polkadot is, what's the vibrancy of the ecosystem and its scale, and how we interact with the Polkadot data, I will explain what our approach imperative was for building the dot lake as the data lake that encapsulates all of the Polkadot ecosystem. As explained by Rada, Polkadot is designed to be a very general and neutral platform that can host any type of application, secure it, and enable it to evolve and scale, I would say, organically as their business need grows. Therefore, we also try to apply a very layered data governance approach into building our data lake here in Parity. So I would stress that it's very cool that Polkadot started really with a very technical, very complex technical problems at the beginning, because we who are working in data were able to grasp that full picture of what's the end game and technical game of Polkadot in order to build also sustainable data platforms that follow that development. So if I abstract the dot lake and try to describe it within these different layering approaches, when we built dot lake, we focused on this layered approach in order to have a data governance that ensures data integrity that is maintained across the entire data pipeline. So each layer, from the raw data ingestion to the final data consumption, is really designed to provide certain checks and balances and ensure that the data quality and completeness is sufficient in dot lake. So at the core of the platform, it's our raw data layer. This is where we store complete untempered data in its original raw form. So we store everything in cases where there are gaps, they are automatically detected, and then the process backfills the data and ensures full history and full accuracy of the historic data that we are ingesting. Instead of traditional ETL process, so extract, transform, load, we actually opted for ELT. We first load the data and then transform it, because keeping the data initially in a data lake gives us the advantage that we keep this raw data intact, and that allows us to kind of decouple the transformation layer from the origination layer and avoid any kind of breaking changes that can occur when protocol experiences very frequent protocol upgrades, and that can reflect also to data collection. So using the sidecar, which decodes the data automatically, we are able to extract the data first and then delay any kind of transformation until later stages, keeping the upper layers of the data stack insulated from the logical protocol changes that happen very frequently on Polkadot, and keeping all of the substrate-based chains ingested in a, I would say, chain agnostic data model. So after the raw data has been passed through this data quality checks, we apply certain transformations. At this stage, we standardize the data. We ensure that definitions and calculations are consistent across all of the chains. And essentially, this middle layer is where the warehousing and synthesis and calculation happens. And it enables us to have this cross-chain composability to compare and aggregate data from multiple chains. And then in the final layer, it's relevant to data consumption. We provide access to users to interact with the data either through SQL or through API access or through dashboard charts and finalized insights there where people can really garner and understand the activity and nuances around Polkadot. If I try to put this in the architectural picture, this is roughly what it looks like. This is the depiction of our batch architecture. We leverage predominantly on GCP for our batch architecture, and for real-time data, we utilize more and more ClickHouse given its very powerful capability. So we use tools like BigQuery, Cloud Run, Terraform. We store everything: blocks, chains, blocks, events, extrinsics for all of the chains within the Polkadot ecosystem, and also some of the solo chains, as I mentioned, which are built using Polkadot SDK, are not part of the shared security model. Some of them you probably heard of, like BitTensor, like Chainflip, like Avail. So we also keep an eye on them just to kind of track the activity and the evolution of those chains that are built using Polkadot SDK and Substrate. So it's very, I would say, cost-efficient architecture, scalable. Everything that we store from the raw data space, we store in untempered JSON files in Google Cloud Storage. And we also use block compressor in order to have some efficiencies in terms of data storage. We use multiple archive nodes to achieve parallelization, and therefore we are pretty happy with having a very cost-effective and scalable data platform that is able to, I would say, follow the evolution of Polkadot and many chains that are popping up within the Polkadot shared security model. And finally, how it looks like in terms of data visualization, you can go visit data.parity.io. You can see a lot of metrics for the Polkadot ecosystem. You can toggle between daily and monthly views between different chains. We also have some real data statistics on there, as well as deep dive reports, such as the automatically updated monthly report or the OpenGov report, and a lot of articles in the area of Polkadot data research, as well as some tutorials to get you started with for example, Python Substrate interface. Having said that, thank you for your attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You can follow us on Twitter and also reach out directly. My email address is pavla@parity.io. Our team would be very happy to engage on any kind of data topic around Polkadot. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavla. Now, before we go for a break, right, we do have a couple of questions that's come in, so do bear with us. Now, thank you again, Pavla, for that wonderful presentation. I think we all learned a lot about how, Polkadot has structured its data. And with that, we do have a couple of questions that has come in already. So first question to you. Is it possible for us to create a private chain with Polkadot similar to how Hyperledger Fabric looks like? It's a multi-part question. So there's the second part, especially in the context of financial compliance related apps that need blockchain data to be permissioned. How easy is this to implement this? And is there a starter kit for this and SDK? Yeah.
Actually, I think this question would be more relevant for Rada to answer. As far as I know, the private chains are possible on Polkadot because it's very general substrate building framework that allows this kind of option.
Yeah, I think one solution is to make it everything like private. So with Polkadot SDK, you should be able to create your own blockchain network. I've actually given workshops where I spin up like a blockchain network in an hour. So it's totally possible for you to run your own like permission private like blockchain network. But that again, being So Polkadot SDK is built using like Rust programming language. And also there is some level of like Polkadot SDK specific things that you need to know before like, customizing it. So there's a little entry barrier, but I did share some of the links directly to that question in the chat. I can also say that verbally. So there are a few companies like Blockdeep Labs. You can check them out. I'll post a link later on that provide like a consultation service. Like if you're serious about like building this like private network, they should be able to give you, how that actually looks like in terms of implementation. But yeah, it's totally possible to create a private network with Polkadot SDK.
Thank you, Radha. And I think this is a very useful question because a lot of people have concerns about the transparency that blockchain provides. I mean, yes, all of us in the blockchain space, we know that one of the core components of blockchain is this aspect of transparency, which allows everybody to see any transactions and audit it. But as you can imagine, in the financial space, privacy may not always be wanted, especially when you're dealing with personal information or even commercial information, right? No bank, I think, would be comfortable knowing what, letting the public know what kind of transactions are occurring. So definitely, I think the fact that Polkadot allows you to create a permission blockchain where you can kind of protect the information that you want kept confidential is vital in helping serve, the financial ecosystem. Now,
so I want to add
yes.
more to this. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Like,
Hmm.
think of like blockchains that are public, but they preserve the privacy for everyone. These are called like privacy chains. I mean, there were a few projects that were trying to do on Polkadot. We heard about like few, like in terms of like Tornado Cash or something, which are very controversial, right? So there is something to draw a line here. So probably what the question is looking for is a permissioned network where they have the privileges to view what's in the network. It's not like it's private completely for everyone and not just the user. So you'll have to find like what's the exact thing that you want to implement, and the Polkadot SDK is customizable enough to for you to pick and choose your use case and sort of have that solution.
Awesome. Now, last question before we go for our break. Is there any test nets that's available on Polkadot where people can test the trustless outcome?
Yeah, so we recently launched a testnet called as Paseo. So it's like a community-run testnet. So there you should be able to. I'll share the link later on. So their GitHub page has like a support repository. So there you should be able to put in a request for getting like a parachain slot. So that way you can test like all the interoperability features and the cross-chain integrations the Polkadot network architecture sort of supports. If you just want to test some of the features on Polkadot itself, we have a testnet called as West End. So there you could like test out like Polkadot's like features in general. But if you're looking more for like parachain development, then Paseo network is the way to go. Yeah, thank you, Pablo, for sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Pavla. Thank you, Radha, for stepping in to answer the questions. With that said, we will be going for a short 10-minute break. So if you need coffee, stretch your legs, please take this opportunity to do so. But more importantly, do make sure you come back on time because, after the break, we do have Jonathan who will be coming on and, like I mentioned, helping us navigate, the complexities of, crypto regulation, how you can safeguard your business. And of course, there is my own session as well. So definitely, please do come back. I will be looking at the number of attendees to make sure nobody drops off, right? With that said, I will have a timer on screen for 10 minutes. So yeah, I'll see you guys back in 10 minutes. All right, welcome everyone back to the second half of our webinar, right? Without further ado, I'd like to invite Jonathan to take over where, like I mentioned, he will be navigating us through, different aspects of crypto compliance, how you can build a safe Web3 ecosystem for your organization. And so over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Ian. Well, here's the obligatory. Can everybody see my screen and only just the one screen, I hope?
Yes.
All right, great. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here and sticking on. My name is Jonathan Rufrano. I am the policy director at the Digital Chamber. Let's get into it. Let's see. Disclaimer, I am not an attorney and this is not legal or financial advice. My presentation today is not necessarily representative of the views of my employer, the Digital Chamber. I am, however, a public policy professional. I've written and passed legislation for my previous employers, the Texas State Legislature and the U.S. House of Representatives. I've also consulted U.S. federal regulatory bodies and international regulatory and standards bodies on blockchain rules and standards. These entities include, but are not limited to, the U.S. Treasury Department, U.S. FinCEN, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, the White House National Security Council, NIST, which is the National Institute on Standards and Technology, as well as ISO, the International Standardization Organization, and the United Nations International Telecommunications Union. I've been working in the blockchain industry and have been addressing blockchain policy since 2019, having since worked for multiple startups. I've also helped found and managed a blockchain research program at Stanford University, helping technologists understand the regulatory boundaries necessary to comply with as they build out the next generation of technical primitives in the space. I've also had the privilege of being a non-attorney member of the Blockchain Lawyers Forum, an international group of blockchain legal experts, as I've been recognized as a policy expert myself. In my current role as policy director at the Digital Chamber, I cover a litany of policy issue areas affecting the blockchain industry, educating lawmakers and rulemakers on the technology and how to effectively achieve public policy objectives in the industry while ensuring technical innovation and economic growth can flourish. Now, a bit about my employer, the Digital Chamber. The Chamber is a nonprofit trade organization committed to promoting blockchain adoption. We envision a fair and inclusive digital and financial ecosystem where everyone has the opportunity to participate. Access to digital assets, we believe, is not merely a technological advancement, but a fundamental human right, crucial for economic and social empowerment. Through targeted education, advocacy, and strategic collaborations with government and industry stakeholders, like Merkle Science, who is one of our members, we drive innovation and shape policies that create a favorable environment for the blockchain technology ecosystem. All right, now that that's all out of the way, let's go into the overview of regulatory compliance obligations. So first things first, the compliance obligations are actually quite complex. There is a whole list of U.S. federal agencies as well as state regulators that firms must comply with, and these agencies have oversight of various aspects of activities that protocols themselves, layer ones, and other ecosystem firms might engage in. This includes the U.S. Treasury, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the U.S. Commodities Futures Trade Commission, the U.S. Federal Reserve Banks, the FDIC, the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body, the U.S. CFPB, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the U.S. IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, FinCEN, which is the U.S. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, as well as OFAC, the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, and like I said, many state regulators. The main conversation around the crypto regulatory environment has focused recently on SEC oversight and whether or not cryptocurrencies are securities and their issuers and traders and exchangers and anybody that deals with them need to register with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Act of 1933 sets out requirements for what are securities and what securities issuers must do in terms of registration with them, public prospectuses, and information that must be given to the public as well as the SEC in order to be authorized to issue a security in the U.S. It also created the Securities and Exchange Commission, which gave the SEC the authority to oversee and regulate all participants in this space. Additionally, the Investment Company Act of 1940 regulated mutual funds and other companies that engage primarily in investing, reinvesting, and trading in securities, and whose own securities may be offered to the investing public. I mention all this because there is an ongoing concern within the crypto industry that there is, quote unquote, a lack of regulatory clarity in the US. Much of this is focused on, as I mentioned, whether or not crypto assets are indeed securities, whether they're commodities, or whether they're something different entirely. Additionally, if they are securities or commodities, the conversation revolves around whether or not the SEC or CFTC has the appropriate authority currently to regulate them and oversee them, or if new legislation and rules are needed. Rules specifically are part of the question that's been in scope, but I'll get to that in a moment. The primary way that the SEC determines whether or not an asset or an offering is a security is through the Howey test. The Howey test was a test developed in the Supreme Court ruling in the 1940s, I believe, that basically says, you know, the SEC has under its jurisdiction and authority the ability to, on a case-by-case basis, test whether or not an issuance of an asset is a security. To meet the 4 prongs of the Howey test, all 4 of them must be met. The asset must be an investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectations of profits based on the efforts of others. Now, the SEC, through multiple court cases, which we'll get to momentarily, has alleged that many crypto assets are securities. Whether or not those court rulings have found that to be the case, legally speaking, has been another question. The frustration with some participants in the crypto industry and this lack of regulatory clarity that they mentioned is coming from the fact that there are no laws in the books that mention cryptocurrencies. Specifically, there are no laws that give the SEC or any other regulatory body purview over them in terms of the capital markets market structure. What instead the SEC has been doing has been, instead of taking legislation and interpreting it and writing their own rules, which is the process through which federal agencies must follow. They generally serve to interpret and write rules surrounding the legislation that the U.S. Congress passes. Instead of having that rulemaking capacity and going through that process, the SEC has been claiming certain crypto assets are securities, and certain participants in the space are unregistered securities issuers, offers, dealers, exchanges, etc., by issuing enforcement actions against these companies and these entities, and ultimately having the courts decide the matter. That's important because there have been many, as you can see, SEC enforcement actions that have gone to court trials over the last 5 years or so. I'll go through a couple of them right now just to give you a sense of how complex this issue is. In 2019, Telegram issued an initial coin offering, or an ICO. They actually did not make it to court. They instead settled with the SEC, so no ruling was made by a U.S. federal body, or a U.S. federal court, rather. Kik, the messaging app, also did something similar in 2019. The SEC and the courts in that case actually did rule that the initial coin offering was an investment contract, meaning it met the 4 prongs of the Howey test. And the way that the investment contracts for the tokens were issued was in a combined offering for retail and institutional investors. That's important because there are such thing as accredited investors, most of which are institutional investors. Retail investors are the everyday, mom and pops, Joe Schmoes, and other, the average everyday retail trader on any given exchange platform or any given investing platform. There are exemptions to securities registrations to institutional investors and accredited investors, which is a key point here in this case, because in 2019 in the Kik ruling, the courts ruled that there was no material difference in issuing a cryptocurrency through an ICO to a retail versus an accredited or institutional investor. Whereas for other securities, there is a material difference and are different laws and rules on the books from the SEC. It also gets more complicated in 2020 when a court ruled that retail sales are actually not securities, but institutional sales are. It gets even further complex in 2022, there was a case against a former Coinbase employee alleging insider trading of certain securities on their platform. 9 of 25 tokens were, 25 tokens were alleged to be securities by the SEC in this enforcement action, but only 9 of which were specifically named. The SEC won this via default judgment here because the defendants did not appear in court. This means essentially that the ruling does not have as much weight as it would if it were decided through trial, and that trial brought to its final kind of point, and the trial was actually had, so the court and the judges and the jury could actually make a determination on whether or not the securities are, the assets are alleged to be securities or not. In 2023, Terraform Labs was sued by the SEC. The case went to court, and the distinction in the Ripple case up here between whether or not there is a difference between retail sales and institutional sales of securities was actually moot. It was a rule that they were all securities. In 2023, Coinbase was also issued an enforcement action by the SEC for their staking offerings, which they alleged to be investment contracts. This is where it gets really interesting because the court ruled that investment contracts need not be actual contracts, but general expectations based on marketing and other circumstances, meaning there needs to be no written agreement between parties to have an actual contract and therefore be an investment contract and therefore meet the requirements of being a security. And then 2023 was a big year, of course. Binance there was a ruling in an SEC case against Binance that said secondary sales are exempt, but the BNB token itself is not exempt. That case is ongoing, as is the case against Kraken and DRW, both of which were brought this year, and the enforcement action against OpenSea, the NFT platform that was announced recently as well. So I mention all this because it is inherently complex, and there is a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity. I would advise you all, anybody participating in this call that is within the crypto ecosystem, to speak with your general counsels and your legal teams to figure out what their risk assessment of your business offerings are, to make a more informed decision of who to register with, if you have to register, and things like that. I should also mention that there may be difference between layer 1 tokens and layer 2 tokens, as well as what are colloquially considered utility tokens versus governance tokens versus stable coins versus NFTs, etc. Really, this is the lack of clarity that people are talking about. I'll say it gets a little bit more complex with the introduction of the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. That entity has oversight of derivatives markets, including futures contracts, options, and swaps on commodities derivatives. This entity also has registration requirements for multiple different players in the space, including trading organizations, clearing organizations, introducing brokers, dealers, commodity trading pools and trading advisors, futures commission merchants, and other commodities intermediaries. Commodities futures intermediaries. The CFTC has jurisdiction over commodities futures markets, but it also has jurisdiction over market manipulation and protection against market manipulation for commodities futures and spot markets, meaning the current price on a commodity versus a future price. Let's see. I'm looking at the. We'll get to questions later in a moment, Sharon. Thank you for them. The question about utility tokens versus governance tokens is also something that is being debated and played out currently, and will continue to be in the coming months and maybe even years. It is unclear whether or not there are distinctions between token types, or whether all crypto assets will be considered one type of thing, like a security or a commodity or something else. However, there is tension and disagreement between the SEC and the CFTC on who does actually have current authority, if anybody, to regulate cryptocurrency markets and token issuances. The chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, initially said when he came into office under the Biden administration that the SEC would need clarifying legislation to be able to do anything with cryptocurrencies. 10 months into his tenure, he made the determination that that was not the case, and claimed that the SEC had the authority and the purview to regulate the crypto markets. The CFTC chair, Rostin Benham, as well as Commissioner Caroline Pham and a number of others have argued against this, saying that the SEC is not the ultimate authority. The CFTC is and should be. Those public discussions are not, in fact, law or rules. So they only serve as intentions on how the SEC and CFTC might view and enforce what they believe is their authority on the crypto industry. I'll also mention that there is an upcoming report on utility tokens from the CFTC, specifically what they are and how they should be treated under the law or the current law, and whether or not the CFTC believes there is any new legislation needed for them. So this all begs the question, really, who oversees crypto spot markets, and what are the requirements, therefore, for crypto industry participants? It's very unclear. And again, this is why I mentioned anybody here that's building in the space should consult with their legal team and their compliance team to make sure that they are in compliance and are able to build what they would like to build here in the US. There are certain requirements that we know crypto firms are required to comply with in terms of the Bank Secrecy Act. The Bank Secrecy Act essentially requires that all financial institutions, including money service businesses and money transmitters, which I'll define shortly, have risk assessment programs that inform the following. Customer identifications, or KYC, know your customer. This is really for onboarding of new customers. Customer due diligence, or the ongoing monitoring of customer activities. Counterparty PII capture and record keeping. So PII in this case would be personally identifiable information of any trading counterparties. So for example, Coinbase as an exchange would be required to gather, collect, and report on the personal information of all users of their exchange and all of their trading counterparties within their exchange and external to their exchange. The largest piece of the puzzle here that will that I think Merkle Science tools really help out with, in addition to all of this, is suspicious activity reporting and filing, or SAR filing. This is essentially a requirement for any entity that's covered under the Bank Secrecy Act to have a risk assessment program for and be able to flag and monitor any suspicious activity within their platforms, and then report it to law enforcement agencies that are relevant within the US and potentially even international law enforcement agencies and the US Treasury. Cash transaction reporting, or CTRs, or just mandatory reporting requirements for any transactions of $10,000 US or greater. The BSA also requires entities that are covered to have written AML, anti-money laundering, and CFT, counterterrorism financing programs and policies, as well as having designated compliance officers, training and auditing, and continuous monitoring of their platforms and their users. Now, this is where it does get a little bit complex. As I mentioned, BSA applies to money transmitters and money service businesses. The money transmitters are defined as entities that provide the delivery, communication, or network access services by a money transmitter. Money service businesses provide the delivery, communication, or network access services used by a money transmitter to support money transmission services. Money transmitters operate a clearance and settlement system, or otherwise acts as an intermediary solely between Bank Secrecy Act regulated institutions. Now, this means, depending on your space in the ecosystem, the services you provide, the dApps you've created, and the smart contracts you've created, you as a crypto industry participant may or may not qualify as a money transmitter and or a money service business, and therefore be required to follow the requirements of the Bank Secrecy Act. We do have clarity, though, that cryptocurrencies do fall within the Bank Secrecy Act. There was a 2014 letter from FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, that exempted miners and validators from being money transmitters and money service businesses. But the 2019 interpretive guidance from FinCEN was issued, which essentially it's an administrative rulemaking that has the weight and power of law. That ruling essentially cemented that cryptocurrencies, or in this case, as they term them, convertible virtual currencies, are in fact currencies under the law, and therefore any businesses or entities dealing in them or in this ecosystem are therefore potentially money service businesses or money transmitters. This has also gotten even more complex within the recent weeks. As Radha mentioned, Tornado Cash was a privacy service based on smart contracts. There's been a lawsuit filed against them, alleging that they are in fact a money transmitter, among other things, and that they aided and abetted in criminal activity and money laundering. The takeaway from that, there was recently an appeal that got dismissed by a federal judge. But in that appeal ruling, the federal judge actually expanded the scope of what it means to be a money transmitter. She did that specifically by lowering the requirements of what it means to be a money transmitter. There are basically 4 requirements, one of which says that you must be able to control funds to meet the definition of a money transmitter. That was in this ruling repealed, essentially. So the impacts of this are potentially widespread. It could mean that this overrules the exemptions for miners and validators from being money service businesses or money transmitters, as well as many other participants in the crypto ecosystem based on their activities, and even outside of the crypto space as well. This could make significant changes for financial institutions, for payment services, but also for data transmitters that run financial rails like the SWIFT International Payments Network. I will say that the Tornado Cash case was based in part on money laundering, but also allowing sanctioned individuals or sanctioned wallets to access that service, the Tornado Cash service. The OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control within the U.S. Treasury Department, has a list of essentially blacklisted individuals and in the crypto space, blacklisted wallets that they call the specially designated nationals and block persons list, or the SDN list. The requirements essentially say that all ecosystem participants must deny all parties access to virtual currency and ensure that the virtual currency is not inadvertently transferred, released, or otherwise dealt in from those blacklisted addresses and individuals from the SDN list. Entities also must report to OFAC any SDN activity within 10 business days, and then annually thereafter if those wallets or those accounts have any updated activity within their platforms or within their networks. So we know that going back to BSA, many crypto industry participants must comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, as well as sanctions regulation and rules from OFAC, specifically avoiding and blacklisting and reporting on transactions for any individual or wallet that is within the SDN list. Some best practices for sanctions compliance program are similar to BSA compliance, but generally include a commitment from management or people in leadership that recognize the importance and the necessity of this and commit to it. Risk assessment, so assessing using certain types of techniques and tools, perhaps using Merkle Science's tools to understand the activity on your platform, or that your tokens deal in, or that your service provides access to, and understanding the risks involved in that, and making a determination based on those risks, what addresses you should transact with, essentially. This also includes internal controls, training on sanctions compliance and best practices, testing and auditing, and transaction monitoring. There's also requirement called the travel rule. The travel rule is applies to exchanges, broker-dealers, over-the-counter trading desks, and possibly custodians. It requires personally identifiable information collection, exchange, and retention with counterparty trading partners across national borders. The EU has implemented this within the trading bloc differently than the US has, in terms of the actual thresholds that are required to be met in terms of the transaction amount to meet the reporting requirements. In the US, any transaction valued at $3,000 equivalent or greater must be captured and reported on to FinCEN, who oversees the travel rule in the US. And transactions valued at €1,000 or greater converted in the EU must be reported to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body. The US is also part of or party to the FATF, though, again, we have our own rules here. They're a little bit less strict in terms of the actual de minimis threshold, the amount of money that needs to be transferred to trigger this requirement for reporting. I'll also say that the travel rule only applies to, as I mentioned, I think, but I want to clarify, transactions that take place across borders. So anybody in the US that has a US wallet address, is holding US, is physically located in the US, that is transacting with anybody in another country, or vice versa. If you happen to have if you are a global entity or a non-US entity that provides crypto services and products, if any of your products are used to transact with individuals in the US, you may be subject to these counterparty information capturing and reporting requirements for the travel rule. There's also the issue of custody. Custody in general for currencies and money and assets is overseen by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank in the US. Recently, there's been updated guidance from the FDIC that is required all financial institutions under their purview to notify their supervisory office of the intent to engage in cryptocurrency custody activities, and then receive specific written notification of the supervisory office's non-objection. So there are not necessarily registration requirements for financial institutions to be able to custody crypto. They just must notify the FDIC and their relevant supervisory office and not receive rejection of their intent to do so. So if you are a financial institution custodying crypto, this is one of your compliance requirements. The qualified custodian status is something that has been proposed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Is a rule that would require registered investment advisors to use qualified custodians, which are different than, they have a different legal status and requirements than other custodians, like other business custodians or businesses that provide custody services in this space, like a wallet provider or things like that. A qualified custodian has more stringent requirements, like I mentioned, and generally include national or state banks, registered broker-dealers, registered futures commission merchant, and registered futures commission merchants. The status of this rule is unclear. It has been proposed, but it has not been finalized. But this does potentially, or would potentially disrupt, any business operations that a Web3 company has if they are not any one of these registered entities and do custody crypto or provide crypto custody services to clients or other entities. Finally, the Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 of the US SEC basically requires, or would require rather, that any banks that custody crypto report them as liabilities on their balance sheet rather than assets. In effect, this means it makes it more expensive for anybody to custody crypto for a third party, or for another party rather. It makes it prohibitively expensive in some cases. This has been lobbied against by the crypto industry, but also voted against, or rather there was a bill in Congress that had bipartisan support that basically said this rule should be repealed. It passed both houses of Congress, the US House of Representatives and the Senate, but was vetoed by the president. There is still interest in repealing this accounting bulletin. There are some that argue that it was out of the SEC's jurisdiction because the SEC does not oversee banks. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency does, and therefore this is an inappropriate guidance, or rather inappropriate rule. But whether or not this will stand is to be determined. Finally, there are tax reporting requirements for crypto businesses. In 2014, the IRS issued guidance that cryptocurrencies are or should be taxed as property. However, the U.S. Investment and Infrastructure and Jobs Act of 2021 updates the definition of brokers. So broker is somebody that deals in or effectuates a transaction of securities or other financial assets on behalf of a third party. It would require that exchanges, brokers, money service businesses, and others that regularly issue 1099 forms to users must also do so for all crypto assets, in addition to their traditional assets. This has been interpreted by the IRS in the form of rulemaking. That rulemaking essentially resulted in a form, a 1099-DA or digital assets form. It is currently in draft form, but the IRS is accepting public comments until November 6th, at which point they will review all of the comments from industry, lawmakers, experts, anybody that would like to comment, and take them into account, and then finalize the specifics of the form and the requirements that entities would need to report on. As it's currently written, however, it would require crypto intermediaries to collect and record user information and transaction information and make those records available to those users. So with all of the lack of clarity in the ecosystem from the SEC, CFTC, FinCEN, the courts, it is unclear whether or not this would apply to this expanded definition of broker would apply to the expanded and updated definition of money transmitters or futures commission merchants or securities exchanges or anything like that. So that is to say that until all of these regulatory authorities and purviews, as well as definitions of who qualifies as what, are figured out, it is advisable to have practices to be able to collect and report on all this information for these, not only for the Form 1099, but also for the BSA, for the SDN list and OFAC requirements and the travel rule requirements and any other requirements that are claimed by the SEC and the CFTC. The last thing I'll mention here is that there has been a push to clarify that infrastructure providers like miners and validators are exempt from this rule and many others for now. But in the future, they may not be, as the IRS is soon to be issuing guidance for decentralized infrastructure providers as well as DeFi and wallet providers that may implicate or extend these reporting requirements to those entities as well. Lastly, there is a requirement for crypto companies and really kind of every company in the US to report on the beneficial ownership of those entities under the Corporate Transparency Act. This just went into effect January of this year. A beneficial owner is defined as a person who enjoys the benefits of ownership through the property's title, and even though if that title to the company is in their another's name. This is separate and legally distinct from legal ownership, though in most cases, legal and beneficial owners are the same. That is to say, to give an example, if I have an LLC, I am the sole proprietor of that LLC. I'm also the beneficial owner because that is my company. There are no shares given to any other entities or individuals, and I have 25% ownership or more in the company. This also applies to any publicly traded company, any Web3 company that has raised equity, any startups, things like that. The beneficial owner or beneficial owners are those that have a 25% share or greater in the company. And that information must be reported to FinCEN under this new requirement from the Corporate Transparency Act. The last thing I'll say here is that wealthy individuals often list their assets under trusts while they remain the beneficial owners. This is likely to be found to apply kind of one-to-one in the crypto and the Web3 ecosystem, where a wallet address might be considered a trust for kind of an analog purpose, but the beneficial owner is the actual individual behind that wallet address, or that controls that wallet address, which would mean that the personal information would have to be gathered and reported on for that individual to FinCEN, essentially kind of giving their wallet information over to FinCEN and associating it with them as a legal person. So I think this all makes it clear that blockchain analytics tools are necessary for compliance. But I think there's also much clarity needed, as I mentioned. There are quite a few questions that are left unanswered, including all of these here. I think I went into most of them during my presentation, so I won't go over them again. As well as, are there or will there be different obligations across different token types? I'll note just for real briefly that the Solana ecosystem just announced earlier today that they are offering SUSD, a new stablecoin on their platform that is backed by US Treasury bills. Traditionally, anything that's backed by a US Treasury bill is considered a commodity for securities laws and commodities laws purposes, and therefore under the jurisdiction of the CFTC. However, there are multiple bills in Congress right now addressing stablecoins, creating new rules and frameworks for them that would put them under the purview of either the Federal Reserve, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or state banking regulators. So this is just another example of the complexities that we're facing currently in the current regulatory ecosystem, compounded by potential changes that might come from legislation in this Congress and the next. If you have any questions about any of the regulatory, the state of regulatory affairs, the Digital Chamber actually does have quite a few law firms as our members that have pledged in-kind services to our other members that are seeking legal advice. I'd encourage you to reach out to me at jonathan@digitalchamber.org for any assistance and for any policy questions on what looks to be on the horizon. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that comprehensive, coverage on crypto regulation. I think crypto regulation as a topic is something that stymies a lot of people. And honestly, there's just so much going on in the space, as regulators themselves, learn about the technology and evolve, their standards. And I think you've done an excellent job in condensing all of that, in less than an hour. So I really appreciate you doing so. And I think the audience definitely does, because I can see, a ton of questions have come in. I think, for the sake of time, I'm just going to pick maybe 2 or 3, right?
Sure.
And then we'll go back to the rest later on. But let's start off with this one that's come in earlier. So regarding OpenSea, and for those of you who are not familiar with OpenSea, OpenSea is an NFT marketplace, arguably, one of the earliest and most successful. Are or would dApps standing for decentralized applications, are or would dApps doing NFT transactions, exchanges, or sales be considered securities, say V token crypto trading? And then the second part, also real-world asset trading using blockchain technology.
So those are great questions, and they are distinct from one another. So I'll answer the NFT one first. So under the SEC's interpretation and kind of the SEC, what they do is essentially the process of suing a company for violating securities laws. The first step in that is issuing what's called a Wells notice, which is basically a formal notification saying that a company is being investigated and that they may have legal action brought against them for violating securities laws. OpenSea actually recently was issued a Wells notice, meaning the SEC is claiming that NFTs on their platform are securities, and that they are, in fact, an unregistered securities exchange. If this is found to be true or valid by a court system, or by SEC rule or any other law that would agree with this, it would in fact clarify that NFTs are securities, and therefore anybody trading in NFTs, creating NFTs potentially, and offering exchanges for or sales of NFTs would be a securities, would be essentially dealing in securities and would have to register with the SEC. Our view at the chamber is that this would effectively create a lot of, this would kind of stamp out all of the NFT ecosystem, especially if creators themselves of the NFTs, such as artists or musicians that just happen to tokenize their work, would have to register with the SEC. That is generally a process reserved for larger financial institutions with a lot of money and legal know-how, not individuals. What I'll say to that also is there is currently a bill that is being introduced in Congress called the New Frontiers and Technologies Act, or the NFT Act, that would serve to clarify that NFTs are not in fact securities, but instead consumer goods, and would protect them from this. So if you are interested in protecting NFTs, I would encourage you to take a look at that bill. In terms of the real world assets trading using blockchain tech, so yes, there is now a renewed focus on what's called real world asset tokenization, which essentially is creating blockchain-based versions of securities, commodities, other types of assets. Conceivably, yes, as we know that, if something is a security already, let's say a stock in a company is a security, a bond is a security, then the blockchain-based versions of those are essentially our securities as well. They function the same manner, just in a different technical or functional form. It would be the same as, if I have, in the 1920s, a stock issued to me on a piece of paper versus today, a stock issued to me and accounted for on a centralized ledger of an exchange company, for example.
Awesome. Thank you for that comprehensive answer. We'll just do one more, right? And like I said, we will circle back at the end. So rest assured. But the second question I have for you is, and this is pretty generic, it's actually been asked a lot, so I think it's going to be interesting for me to hear your response as well. But if you were to launch or issue a token as a founder, in which jurisdiction and country would you do so, and why? And I will reiterate on Jonathan's behalf, whatever he says is not legal advice and speaking in his personal capacity, right? But yes.
I appreciate that. It's hard to say. There are certain jurisdictions across the world, including Dubai and Hong Kong and Singapore, that are focusing very closely on creating spaces where there is clear legislation, regulation, and rules for the crypto ecosystem. And it is also more friendly in terms of a registration requirement standpoint, and also an issuance requirement standpoint and trading. So I think those are some of the jurisdictions that are very forward thinking and have clear rules on the books so far. I would also say Switzerland has been very thoughtful. They put regulation forth, I think, in 2019. I think they were the first, if not one of the first, if not the first country to do so. And they do have legal distinctions between different token types. So I think, based on the activities you engage in as a crypto company, and whether or not you issue a token and what type of token that is, I think you'd find Switzerland to also be an interesting place to set up shop and to register with.
Awesome. All right. So with that, we will move on to the last presentation, which will be conducted by myself. Rest assured, it won't take more than 10-15 minutes, and then we will circle back to all the questions that you guys have. But what I will be doing in the next 10-15 minutes is just showing you guys, a short demonstration of what we mean on when we talk about how companies can utilize blockchain analytical tools to enhance their compliance and risk management. Right, so allow me to share my screen and let's take a look at some of these tools in action. So quick shameless plug, on behalf of Merkle Science, we have developed a range of different crypto monitoring softwares, right? On the one hand, we have our Compass solution, which is what I'm going to be showing you. This is a wallet and transaction monitoring tool that can be customized to help you comply with your local KYT requirements. We have a crypto forensics tool called Tracker. And then finally, we have a crypto business and token risk assessment tool called KYBB, right? And so I'll briefly be showing you a little bit of Compass and a little bit of KYBB and token monitoring, which I think, you guys might find a little bit interesting. And then we'll quickly, like I mentioned, come back and make sure that you guys have enough time with the presenters to ask them any other questions that you guys might have. So with that, what you guys are looking at right now is our Compass solution. Like I mentioned, this is a crypto wallet and transaction monitoring tool. One of the great things about blockchain is the fact that it is built on a decentralized and transparent database. Now, what that means is essentially whenever a transaction happens, anybody monitoring the blockchain is able to see which are the addresses that participated in the transaction, who is the sender, who is the receiver, what time did it happen, as well as the amount that was transacted, right? And all of this is very valuable information that compliance officers, law enforcement, and regulators can use to enhance their risk management. And what we've built here at Merkle Science, with our Compass solution, is a tool that helps organizations actually track in real time their crypto transactions so that they can better monitor where funds are coming and going and ensure that they're not unknowingly transacting with, illicit entities like sanctions, darknet marketplaces, and so on. So one of the things that, our ethos here at Merkle Science is that we recognize that, compliance can be challenging. And so we focus a lot on automating monitoring for our clients. The other thing that we also recognize very early on is that a lot of crypto businesses oftentimes operate in many different jurisdictions. And whilst that may be, a dream come true for your sales team, because you're essentially telling them, hey, you can sell to the entire world, let me tell you, it's an absolute nightmare for your compliance team, right? Because what you're essentially telling them is that, hey, we're operating in a dozen different countries, but what that essentially means for them is that they have to comply with, a dozen different regulatory frameworks. So in order to make things easier for users, one of the things that we've done here at Merkle Science is rather than presenting with you guys with a set of rules for your monitoring, we've built something called a risk policy engine that is highly customizable, that actually allows our users to, without any coding knowledge, create and modify the rules within the platform to help them comply with their local regulations as and when it evolves. So what you're looking at right now is our risk policy engine, right? If a user or a compliance officer wanted to create a new policy, they can do so very easily. All they need to do is click add policy, give it a name, give it a description. And once that's done, they can then click into the policy itself, where they'd be able to access the rule list, which is basically, all the rules created under this policy. Now, for any new startup entering the Web3 space, we recognize that sometimes it can be very difficult to kind of understand what are the rules that are applicable to you. So, rest assured, here at Merkle Science, we do have a bunch of partners that we work with, and the platform that we've developed also comes with a set of predefined rules that you can use out of the box. That being said, we do focus a lot, again, on customizability. So regardless of whether you choose to use our out-of-the-box rules and policies, you always have the ability to freely edit any rule that you want, or simply create new rules, right? So for example, if you wanted to create a rule to detect for sanctions violation, you could do so relatively easily, assign it a risk score that you think is commensurate. So in this case, a critical risk. And then it's a simple matter of telling our system, okay, what do I want this rule to detect? And a very simple example of what the tool can do for you is that you can specify, all right, I want you to flag this rule if any address that I'm monitoring has, say, directly received payments from, in this case, categories of sanctions. You can specify, a minimum dollar value amount if you want, a maximum dollar value, a taint threshold, and an upper taint threshold, right? So we recognize that, in the crypto space, different businesses have different risk appetites. Oftentimes, this is determined based on the jurisdictions that you operate in, the clientele that you serve. So, we don't want to be the one to tell you what's right or wrong, but rather we provide you with the tools to automate your compliance monitoring based on your risk appetite. Now, once all of this has been set up, what it looks like from an ongoing monitoring perspective, is your team will basically be sending us addresses and transactions in real time via the API that we've built in. As those addresses and transactions are sent to us, all of that gets run against the predefined rules that you've set. And once you click into the address, what we will show you then is an example of the rules that might have been triggered and the risk detected. Now, unfortunately, I really did my best before this call to try and find a couple of good examples of illicit activity on Polkadot. Unfortunately, I couldn't find that many examples. So what I'm actually going to show you guys is an example of a good address on Polkadot, and then I'm going to jump over to Bitcoin to show you what a bad address looks like, right? So this is an example of what you would see if you had screened, let's say, a Polkadot address, right? Here you can see very clearly on the left who controls it, right? In other words, we call this attribution data, right? So here at Merkle Science, we have a team of analysts that's sole job is to actually scour the blockchain in order to identify, organizations that control different crypto addresses so that we can present that information to our client to help them influence their monitoring. Other things that you'll be able to see in the platform is, of course, any balance held inside the wallet, aggregated historical transaction information like total incoming, total outgoing, when the address was active, as well as a list of all the rules that might have flagged. Like I mentioned, this is a relatively clean address, so we don't have that many, critical open alerts. But if we do scroll down, we can also then see all the entities that this address had interacted with, right? And so this is really one of the great things about blockchain. It's really providing compliance officers with so much data to help them influence their analysis. And when you compare this to the traditional Web2 space, where oftentimes, if you're sitting in a bank and your client is performing a deposit, as a compliance officer in a Web2 bank, you really have very little insight into where your client's funds are coming from. And so oftentimes you have to rely on client disclosure, forms, and whatnot. But the beauty about cryptocurrency is because these transactions happen on an open blockchain, we can actually see and map out where funds are coming and going, right? And so within our Compass solution, we have what's called a built-in investigation graph that actually automatically shows you where an address's funds are coming and going, both direct and indirect, right? So here what we see in the middle is the address that I'm screening. And if we look to the left, we can actually see where all this address's funds are coming from, right? So we can see very clearly, how funds have indirectly come in from other exchanges like Kraken, GetIGo, KuCoin, and various others. If, let's say, criminals decide to, hide their source of funds by moving it through various intermediary wallets, well, the great thing about blockchain is, again, it is transparent. So we actually have the ability to trace beyond these intermediary wallets, right? And the ability to trace is not just limited to where funds are coming, but we can also see where funds are going, right? And this is particularly useful, for a lot of exchanges, because oftentimes, if the criminal is smart, they're going to withdraw their funds to, let's say, a newly created wallet, which is obviously not going to show any risk because it has no transaction history. But say, 3 days later, the criminal then decides to move its funds to one of its bad wallets. Well, the beauty of blockchain is that it will be able to detect that subsequent transaction. So let's go ahead and take a look at actually, what a critical risk or what a bad address looks like, right? And so, I've just jumped to a new screen, and this is an example of an address that belongs to KuCoin, but was actually sanctioned by the OFAC, right? And Jonathan had covered in his presentation, what the OFAC is, the Office of Foreign Asset Controls. They are one of the first organizations globally that have taken steps to actually publish addresses which they know are linked to different criminal actors. And so if you're a crypto vast, you definitely want to be aware of the OFAC and the sanction list, because this is one of the violations that you definitely do not want to be caught violating. Now, in this example, we can see that this address had flagged, various different risks, right? The fact that it had received funds from other OFAC sanctioned addresses, both directly and indirectly. And again, the beauty of the blockchain-based system is that we can actually map out and see where these funds have come and gone. And so what you're looking at right now is a more complex example of how, the illicit actor had tried to kind of hide his source of funds by moving it through a number of different intermediary wallets. As you can see over here, we have 1 layer, 2 layer, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 before actually entering into KuCoin, right? But again, the beauty of blockchain-based monitoring is that regardless of the number of times that they're layering their funds, we have this transparent database that allows us to pierce through all these intermediary wallets. Now, as you can imagine, as a compliance officer, if you had to do all of this analysis manually, it'd probably drive you crazy. And so rest assured, here at Merkle, we do automate all of this for you. We try to make your life as easy as possible by providing you with all the information you need for your reporting. And, once you're done with your analysis, we even have the ability for you to export a report automatically, right? Thereby streamlining your compliance reporting obligations. Now, it's important to know that crypto monitoring is not just done at an address level. In fact, today, what we're seeing is that a lot of regulators, as they are starting to understand the capability of leveraging blockchain data, they've started to leverage blockchain data and monitor it at a macro level, right? So what I mean by that is, for example, one of the really cool things that you can do with blockchain data is, for those of you who deal with a lot of token issuers, oftentimes you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know if a token is safe, right? Well, the great thing about blockchain is, again, all this data is actually readily available, right? Here at Merkle, one of the other stuff that we've built is a token monitoring dashboard where users can easily look up any token in existence. In this case, I've pulled up a very popular token called Tether, right? It's a stablecoin, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with. And, with the data that we sit on, what we're able to do is we're able to provide our users with real-time insight as to things like, and let me actually refresh this. We're able to provide users with real-time insight as to, how many wallets are actually holding a specific token, what's the daily average trading volume, what are the top token holders, but more importantly, from a risk and compliance perspective, what percentage of, let's say, token holders of a specific token are linked to, let's say, darknet marketplaces, ransomware, and so on. Now, USDT Tether is a pretty popular token. So as you can imagine, it is sitting on a lot of data. So it is taking a little bit longer to load. See if we can refresh this. And if not, we will try, let's say, a smaller token in the interest of time. Let's go with USDC, another very popular stablecoin. Bear with me, blockchain data is huge. A lot of these blockchains are, hundreds of gigabytes large. This is taking a little bit longer than I like. So you know what? In the interest of time, I'm actually going to move on and circle back to this later on. But the other thing that I wanted to show you guys is, the ability to do monitoring isn't just restricted to a token layer, but this can also be done at, let's say, an exchange level, right? So a lot of the times, organizations and regulators today, they are looking to use blockchain data to monitor, let's say, VASP. And so what you can do, for example, it is possible for us to aggregate data of a VASP in order to provide, useful analytics such as, how many wallets are currently controlled by a certain exchange, what's currently inside their treasury, as well as what percentage of their deposits and withdrawals are, let's say, coming and going to illicit actors. Now, okay, finally, it is loading. Perfect. Okay, so over here, you can see the USDC token, right? What we're able to provide users is real-time insight as to how many active wallets are currently sitting on USDC. We can see the distribution across the different blockchains that support daily transaction count, volume, which are its top exchanges that are holding its token. But more importantly, from a risk and compliance perspective, we're also able to provide you guys with insights such as, the number of transactions involving USDC that are linked to, let's say, high-risk organizations like malware, theft, mixing, You can actually see dollar value amounts. And of course, with the focus and emphasis on sanctions, we can also provide you with insight as to, how many transactions involving USDC has taken place over the last 30 days involving sanctioned entities, right? And as you can imagine, a lot of this information is useful not just to, let's say, banks, exchanges, but to regulators themselves, where they are starting to actively monitor cryptocurrency activity proactively, right? And this to me is very interesting because, traditionally the way that compliance is done is a reporting regime, right? Which means that they rely on financial institutions and VAS to report to them when something happens. But, with the decentralized and transparent nature of blockchain, this is essentially providing regulators with the ability to proactively monitor token issuers and VASP and actually independently reach out to them whenever a illicit activity happens. I know I'm very excited to say that, as blockchain monitoring evolves, we're only going to see these use cases grow, right? And so for those of you who are interested to find out more about how you can leverage blockchain analytics to enhance your risk and compliance, do feel free to reach out. But with that, that's all that I'm going to say about Merkle Science. For those of you who are interested, do reach out to me. I'm more than happy to engage with you guys one-on-one where necessary. But with that, I actually want to turn the time back over to our presenters while we still have them and answer some of these questions that have come up in the meantime, right? So now, glad to see that we have all our presenters. Now, let me start going through all these questions that have come in. So, first question, I think this is more for myself. What services and product does Merkle Science cover for the Polkadot ecosystem? Do we support DOT and parachains? So here at Merkle, we actually provide coverage on the Polkadot ecosystem across all the different platforms that we support. What that means is that if you're an exchange looking to onboard Polkadot, you can work with Merkle Science where we can provide real-time screening in order to ensure that the Polkadot you're receiving is not coming from an illicit actor. We also have coverage of Polkadot over our investigation tool. So in the unfortunate event that you suffer a hack involving Polkadot, we can be called in to help with the tracing. And of course, whilst we don't support all of the parachains, we do support a couple, right? So if you are looking to build on Polkadot and you would like support for your chain, do feel free to reach out and we can always have a conversation around that. Now, moving on, second question, and I'm going to be honest, some of these questions, I'm not sure who is best placed to answer them. So I will just open up to all three presenters. Anybody who feels like, you have something to add, feel free to just jump in. Second question over here, how does the platform handle transaction analysis across multiple blockchains, particularly in DeFi and cross-chain environments? Again, I think this is more for myself. So one of the great things about our system is that we do recognize that bridging is becoming a big issue, right? As well as, the one of the features about the EVM blockchain is that, the same address can be used across all the EVM family. So what we've done here at Merkle Science is a couple of things. If you are screening an address on one of the EVM chains, we actually take the liberty to actually screen it across the other EVM chains in order to highlight if there is illicit activity on one of the other chains that could be relevant for your analysis. We've also built a number of automated cross-chain analysis capability. So if your user is trying to launder funds using a bridge, we do have the ability to automatically trace across it. Moving on, and another question that we have over here, and I think this is probably for Jonathan. Can you provide guidance on what are the reverse solicitation conditions to serve US customers without registering with the US authorities, if any?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually already had a chance to answer that in the chat. But the long and short of it is no, I'm unfortunately not familiar with that area. So I don't feel qualified to answer that question. However, I would strongly recommend that you speak with a legal professional about that, if that's something that you are actively engaged in or plan to engage in.
Thank you. Now, next question, I think this is for the Polkadot team. Oh wow, this is tough. How do recent SEC rulings on cryptocurrency and tokens like Ripple and Coinbase cases affect layer one protocols like Polkadot? And I do recognize that both of you are more from the technical side, but if you do have anything to share, please do chime in.
Yeah, I think the closest thing that I can point to is the Web3 Foundation's announcement saying like DOT is not a security. So this has been announced, I think last year sometime, after a lot of correspondences with SEC. So notably, like even DOT is missing from multiple SEC documents that, whenever they mention a token as a security, you never see DOT being mentioned there. But SEC has not officially announced that, DOT is not a security. I don't think it's an interest of them, or they're not even interested to do something like that. But at least like the foundation itself sort of put this announcement there. I think you can take a look at that, and you can also look at the path the foundation took in sort of even like making that bold announcement, right? So working with SEC, sitting with them, trying to explain what we do, how we, from the beginning of like, DOT token issuance till now, like how we decentralized our network. So I think that played a significant role in making that announcement.
Thank you. Now, and this is again for the Polkadot team. So you guys talked about the Polkadot DAO. What step has Polkadot taken to ensure compliance with global financial regulations, especially with its decentralized governance structure?
Short answer is we didn't do. We didn't do or take any. I think the Polkadot DAO is like a on-chain construct. We have the concept of like this treasury, which is sort of funded with the inflation of DOT token. It's not coming from outside, so it's coming from the network itself. So I don't think there's any sort of regulatory framework to even assess like this kind of like DAO and its like treasury model. So we are like one of the pioneers in terms of like on-chain governance, but whether it's compliant with like regulation, we don't know, because there's no regulation on such things to my knowledge, at least. But when the regulators actually see the mechanism of like Polkadot DAO, then we would get to know whether we are compliant or not. For now, I don't think we have the knowledge yet.
Thank you. And then I will add in to say that, yes, a lot of the world is still coming to terms with how to regulate DAO. I think one of the challenges is that, with a DAO, you usually don't have a legal entity behind it. And a lot of the regulators, their concern is, well, if there's no legal entity or person behind it, then who do we hold accountable, right? And I think accountability is always, a key concept for regulators. And it's not just for DAO, but I think, they struggle with this concept with a lot of the decentralized applications, DeFi products that have come up. So definitely pay attention to this space. What I will say on this topic is that the FATF in the past has offered some guidance on how you can think about regulating decentralized platforms. And some of the guidance that they put out suggests that maybe they might look towards who is able to profit off the decentralized application, who has control to change its code, and things like that. But that being said, whilst that is guidance put out by the FATF, which is an international body, depending on where you are based, it is still up to your local regulations to determine what needs to be done.
Yeah. On that note, like Polkadot DAO did establish like a Polkadot foundation. We have like a DAO funded like foundation that was like established, which is sort of taking the initiative, because like the DAO also sponsors a lot of like sports organizations that we showed, and then we have like companies that are benefiting from like the DAO funding. Even one of your competitors, I forget their name. What's the other it's not Merkle Science, but
Chainalysis, maybe.
Chainalysis. Like Chainalysis made like a proposal for funding with like Polkadot DAO. So if such funding goes through, like who will make them like accountable to deliver like their tasks, right? Like, so the DAO itself implemented an on-chain logic for periodic funding, on-chain logic. So which will cancel the funding if they're not delivering. But in terms of like legal tussles or issues, you definitely need an organization to represent the Polkadot DAO. And we have a Polkadot Foundation established for that. So
If I may
Makes
chime in real quick, I'd also offer Rada. I'm sure that the compliance and legal team within the Polkadot Foundation and other associated orgs have definitely consulted with the Polkadot DAO on regulatory compliance, and I'm sure that they understand the requirements and are striving to meet those requirements where they can. Ian, to your point, there are a couple of states in the U.S. that have created laws for DAOs and how the regulatory requirements, specifically the states of Wyoming and Vermont. I would, if anybody that is creating a DAO is interested in creating a DAO, those may be appropriate places to look to in the U.S. to find regulatory clarity there.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I have heard that Wyoming did regulate DAO, but I'm not aware of too many companies that have actually set up there. I know of a couple, but it'd be interesting to see how that is recognized outside of Wyoming, because at the end of the day, if you are still only recognized in one state, that is quite limiting in what you can do. So it'll be interesting to see, how the rest of the world kind of catches up. So next question I have over here, and this is back to you, Jonathan. If I have a private entity that is keeping assets for the purpose of asset recovery and have custody of the private keys, do you think there is a need for registration in the US and EU by the best of your knowledge? And what are some regulatory setup that you can recommend?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I jumped the gun here and got excited and answered these in the chat, but I think for the folks that maybe are watching this recording at home and might not have access to the chat, I'll answer it here too. So I'll say that is an entity that may have many regulators claim to have jurisdiction over them, or that do have jurisdiction over them. It is a good question. I think that the Bank Secrecy Act would definitely apply. I would assume that asset custody rules as well, not just crypto asset custody rules, but traditional asset custody. I say that because FinCEN has made it clear that cryptocurrencies are assets and subject to BSA rules and everything else. I would say that also the qualified custodian rule from the SEC that I mentioned in my presentation earlier might also qualify or apply rather. Meaning they might have to register with the OCC or become receive a specific charter or license based on the interpretation of that rule. Capital requirements as well might apply if they are a financial institution rather than a custodian, or even if they are just a custodian, they might be subject to capital requirements as are other financial institutions. Any type of money transmission laws, if they do in fact transfer in and out and effectuate those transfers, may also apply. And then I think, critically as well, there are many rules outside of the crypto asset space and the financial space that apply when dealing with and providing services and products to government agencies and entities. In the US, depends generally on which agency and entity that if you're custodying data or funds for. Certain agencies have much more stringent cybersecurity and data privacy requirements than others. I would assume that may be the case for EU entities based on the nation state and the agency or entity as well. But I would encourage anybody that is doing this activity to, like I said, consult with a legal professional that has experience in this type of activity to make sure that they are in compliance and they are aware of all of the requirements. And if this is a multi kind of country entity or activity, I would very much encourage an international law team that has experiences with these activities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I think we have covered most of the questions that have come in. Apologies if I've missed anything. But if anybody has any more questions, please do post them inside the Q&A, before we wrap up. What I will say, whilst we're waiting for any last questions that are coming in, is that I will shortly be sharing the link to the assessment inside the chat. So for those of you who would like to go ahead and take the assessment in order to obtain your certification, please feel free to do so right after. For those of you, who would like to do it at a later date, that's not an issue as well. One of the things that we will be doing after the webinar is over is we will be circulating a recording to everybody who signed up for attendance. So do feel free to, review the recording at your own time as well before doing the assessment if you wish. But with that, let's see if we have any final questions for our panelists and presenters. All right. If not, now before we wind up, I like to maybe just pose an open question, to all presenters. Is there any advice that you have to our audience over here, from the Polkadot team, any advice for builders who are looking to engage or build on on Polkadot, what are some of the resources that they can tap on? And, maybe after that, Jonathan, if you have some, generic advice for any company looking to get regulated, maybe you could point them towards some good resources that they can refer to. But maybe we'll start off with Raga and Pava.
Sure. I would say, I'm actually very comfortable working at like Web3 Foundation. I mean, originally I was like a teaching professor at University of Vermont, so I know Vermont kind of reminds me of like Switzerland a bit in the US. So I made the switch and I'm comfortable working here because I know, Web3 Foundation put the effort to be regulatorily compliant, right? So it sort of helps. Like at the end of the day, we are part of like jurisdictions. It's important that we comply with law. And also if there's something wrong with it, like we put the effort to correct it because, so a constitution or like law is not like set in stone. You tend to like make changes to it. Similarly, even Polkadot ingrained that philosophy on chain as well. So we have on chain governance related like upgrades where we can rewrite the code itself, right? So without like doing it like off chain. So we strongly believe in a dialogue with like regulators and compliance. It's always important to be compliant, and that's the advice I have for new projects that are trying to enter the Web3 space.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that for any person that's curious about building on Polkadot, I would say first engage with the community, go to the Polkadot forum, see what topics are interesting, what kind of tooling is discussed around Polkadot, and engage with OpenGov interfaces like Polkassembly and Subsquare, see what community members and wider ecosystem is proposing in terms of tools and developments that are needed for the Polkadot ecosystem, and just engage with people and browse the Polkadot wiki, which can give you really comprehensive information and startup templates on how to start building and start tinkering around Polkadot.
Thank you. And Jonathan, what great advice do you have for our audience before, they leave us?
I would say that, I am a U.S. citizen. I was born and raised here. I think the U.S. has been at the forefront of innovation over the last century or so. I would like to keep that here, or at least allow innovation to continue in the U.S. So for anyone based in the U.S. or that wants to operate in the U.S., I'd love to speak with you, on how to best effectuate change and advocate for the industry, and how to reach policymakers effectively. So please reach out. In terms of actual like building though, make sure you consult with a legal team that has experience in crypto. That would be my best advice before you start building and before you issue a token, especially. There are complexities, as I've mentioned multiple times on this presentation already on this call. So it's very critical to make sure that you understand the rules of the road and are able to follow them not only from a regulatory standpoint, but from a technical standpoint. If you're hoping to build a product that is fully decentralized, great. I'd love to see that, but there are, for better or worse, rules in the books that may prevent certain aspects of that. So having an understanding of that before building or before releasing rather is very, very, very critical.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, to all three of you, for your wonderful advice, for, spending time educating, our audience on, what Polkadot is, benefits of building on it, and of course, helping us navigate, some of the compliance challenges when it comes to getting regulated in the Web3 space. Now, for those of you who would like to engage with, any of the speakers directly, separately, do feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to connect you directly to them. They have a couple of them have also shared their email addresses at the end of the presentation. So do feel free to just email them directly as well. Once again, I'd like to thank everybody for staying with us. It has been, quite a long session, but we really appreciate how engaged everyone was with all your questions. Again, special thanks to, all my presenters, appreciate you guys taking the time. And yeah, to the audience, do look forward to more webinars that we'll be hosting in the future. If there are specific topics that you'd like us to cover, do feel free to write in to make suggestions. And we're always open to hearing feedback for the future. But with that, happy Wednesday, I think, for most everyone. And, I wish you a great rest of the week. Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.